Hello, and welcome to the 2018 fantasy baseball season. And let's help the dumb guys help you out. And so what we're going to do right here is we're going to go back to a draft from a few years ago and go over the lessons we learned from the past.
Yeah.
And see how we moved on and how it's going to make us better fantasy players this year. And I picked the 2015 draft because I think I walked away from that season saying I want to make a lot of changes in my strategy. And so I want to pass on the lessons I learned from basically failing that year.
Yeah.
I believe I failed. I think I finished about in the playoffs 5th or 6th, but that wasn't good enough for me.
Yeah.
I had to do better.
Yeah. So the 2015 draft happened to be the first time we did a YouTube video. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was a YouTube audio because there was no video for that. But that's the first time we did a sleepers or a draft video. So you might want to go back and check that out if you're interested to see what's going on. But yeah, there's always something that you can learn from your draft. I learned something immediately after I did my draft, but definitely looking back at past drafts, you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to learn from this draft. I ended in 2nd place that season. I guess I could learn a little bit, so I could have taken the championship. But I think I did pretty good on this draft. But there's a few things that I'll talk about here that I did learn.
Okay, great. And so I'll start it off. And so my first pick was Jose Abreu. Now, he was all right, but he wasn't first round all right. Mm-hmm. He was more like a 2nd or 3rd round type production. Mm-hmm. And what my thinking going into that was he was really good his first year in the majors. He might be even better next year. But I think what I learned is you need guaranteed production out of your first pick. That's why going into this year, I love Arenado, I love Goldschmidt, and I love Trout.
Yeah.
Because those guys have just done it, and there's nothing to indicate they won't do it again this year.
I agree with you 100%, dude. Mm-hmm. Your first round pick has to be a guarantee guy.
Yeah.
And actually, in the 2015 draft, my first and second pick were guarantee guys. Mm-hmm. I had Bautista and Donaldson as my first and second pick. Mm-hmm. Both of those guys, 40 home runs, 115 plus RBIs. They were monsters for me, and so that is what brought me to the point where I could be in 2nd place. I was in the championship, and I lost in the championship. Yeah. But what I did do is I busted on my 2nd and 3rd. Or my 3rd and 4th pick.
Oh.
My 3rd and 4th pick were Ian Desmond and Jacoby Ellsbury. And those guys underperformed big time.
Yeah. Well, my second pick that draft was Troy Tulowitzki. And I think he was a total bust. My thinking was he's going to be the best shortstop if he could stay healthy. Mm-hmm. And it was taking a risk with your 2nd pick. I think you take a risk with later picks than that.
Yeah.
He was not healthy. I think he still hit about 20 home runs or so in 2015. But he was not 2nd pick worthy.
Yeah. And so speaking of taking risks later on in the draft, I think my next point here is something that I did, and that was I took Kris Bryant in the 2015 draft, his rookie year, in the 12th round. Mm-hmm. And everybody told me after the draft, they said, you reached too far for Bryant. You reached too far. Well, a rookie of the year later tells me that I reached just right. And that turned out good. And that's the kind of guy that you want to get. And you'll hear us say this in other videos as well. Like, go for that prospect guy with a high ceiling that maybe hasn't proven himself. As long as you do it at the right time, he could be the difference maker in your league.
Yeah. And you always want to reach just right.
Just right.
Always.
Reach around.
Yep. Now, I want to get into kind of strategy here. So I believe it was my 5th and 6th picks were Billy Hamilton and D. Gordon. So obviously I was trying to win stolen bases. And I did dominate stolen bases that year. But I think when you go into that stolen base strategy, and a lot of people tell you stolen bases are becoming more and more rare, so they're super, super valuable. But when you have a rotisserie league, that's 1 out of 10 stats.
Yeah.
And a guy like Billy Hamilton, definitely you sacrifice a lot of stats to get the stolen bases. We have an OPS league, but D. Gordon could be more valuable in a batting average league.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the same thing with D. Gordon, just no home runs and no power, maybe some stolen bases. Well, actually, a lot of stolen bases, maybe a nice amount of runs scored. But that much stolen bases and doing it twice like I did, I really suffered. I won stolen bases almost every week, but I really suffered in my other categories.
In other categories. Yeah, and that's the thing. And so balance is very important when you're building your fantasy team.
Yeah.
But don't overdo it, and I'll get into that a little bit later about or trying to overbalance. One of the things that I kind of learned as well is what I don't want to do is wait too long on pitching. I know sometimes you'll hear us say just wait on pitching because there's guys out there. Well, if you've got some good sleepers, yeah, do that. But in this particular draft, I took a guy in the 8th round. I took Matt Holliday in the 8th round. He didn't pan out. He didn't have a great season before that. He didn't have a great season that year. And I left guys on the table like Garrett Cole, who had his best pitching year to date. I left Jacob deGrom on the table, rookie of the year that year. And what I ended up doing is I ended up falling down and taking, guys like Tanaka, Cobb, Panada, and McHugh for my rotation. Jordan Zimmerman was the anchor of my rotation. I picked him up in the 5th round, and I mean, he wasn't fantastic either. So that's kind of what I take away from those middle rounds is make sure you're making solid picks during that time because it could come back to bite you.
Definitely. Now, I'm actually going to talk about a player I didn't pick this draft, but I had him the year before. And I think what a lot of fantasy owners do is they pick somebody, if he underperforms, they become overly bitter.
Yeah, right.
And they make sure not to have him next year. And that happened to me with Bryce Harper.
Yeah.
I picked him the year before. I believe I was I think I was the turnaround pick, so I was the 10th and 11th picks. And with my 11th, I took Bryce Harper. He was hurt almost all year.
Burned me. Big time.
But then the next year, I was like, I hate that Bryce Harper guy. And you know what he did? Is he won MVP.
Yeah, right. He had a fantastic season.
And he was picked in the 4th round. So somebody in the 4th round got the MVP winner.
Yeah. So basically got a first round valued pick.
And the year before, I was going, this is a huge talent. Got to get on board with this guy. And he got hurt. And I was too bitter the next year about it. So I got to learn my lesson from that.
Just to take that the opposite. So the next guy on my list was Devin Morosco. So if you remember in 2014, this guy was an unknown. And I picked him up off of waivers, and early in the season, he dominated all year. He was great value at catcher. Because of that, I put a lot of value on him going into the 2015 draft. Well, it backfired on me big time because he ended up getting hurt. And this is a guy who's never come back, really. He's never bounced back. And so I picked him up in the 9th round. And what I did was I left a ton of catchers on the table because of that. I left Gaddis, Gomes, Molina, Lucroy, and McCann all on the table after that pick. So don't put too much weight on that previous year if they did well for you, because it doesn't mean they're going to repeat.
Well, I think that's a great tie-in to my next pick. And so I believe it was the 12th round, so I took Hunter Pence. And that was because a couple years before he was great for me. But Hunter Pence only played like 50 games in 2015. And you know who was picked about 2 picks later?
Who?
It's Manny Machado.
Oh, man.
And that was his breakout year.
Yeah.
And that's why I talk about, in later rounds, take your high ceiling guy.
Yes.
Because Manny Machado was starting to show some signs before, and then he broke out. I think he had like 35 home runs and 20 steals, a nice batting average.
Yeah. You got to take a chance. Player. You got to take a chance on that guy who's got the talent, who maybe hasn't produced up to that level yet, who could explode. Those are the guys that win you your leagues.
Yeah, and I'd say Pence, I was hoping for him to just repeat what he'd done forever. He ended up being hurt. And Machado, I just didn't take on the chance on that future superstar.
Yeah. Well, one of the lessons I took away from this, and I think one of my previous comments supports this as well as pitching. Pitching was a struggle for me in this season's draft, and that was proven by the relief pitchers that I took. I took Drew Storen and Fernando Rodney in the 11th and the 14th round, and neither of those guys had a good season. And in fact, neither of them were on my roster by the end of the season. I dropped those guys, and I think I even took them too early. For what I got. So, you got to commit. I think if you're going to take a closer early, and you got to get one of those top few guys, or you have to wait. Don't spend a big draft pick and get that solid, consistent, maybe not top guy, but a guy who's going to produce, saves for you.
I always have a tough time with when do I take closers, because it always seems like there's that guy that takes closers just way too early.
Yes.
And it kind of jinxes the game for everybody because like the top closer guys off the table. Some people freak out and go, now I got to take closer.
Yeah, right.
But then if you wait, it's like there's only so many closers in the game.
Yeah.
So it's kind of always a challenge to decide when to take closer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now here is an interesting pick, and this is actually one that worked out great for me that year. And I think it kind of kept me from being like a cellar dweller with how poorly a lot of my top picks went. And that's I took Lorenzo Cain with the 22nd pick. And the reason I picked him is because I was watching the World Series the year before, the 2014. That was the year Bumgarner dominated, and they played the Royals. And I was watching Lorenzo Cain. He only hit like 5 home runs in 2014, and he had a nice batting average, stole some bases. But I was watching him and watching his swing in the World Series and going, this guy should hit way more than 5 home runs. And I targeted him, picked him up, and then he was third in MVP voting the next year. He had 28 steals, 16 home runs, hit over 300, scored over 100 runs. And so what I learned from that is actually watch some baseball and pick up on the guys and have a good eye for – because what I saw is that he looked like the fastest, strongest guy on the field out of the Giants and Royals in the World Series that year. And it paid off for me, actually watching some baseball on TV.
It's funny that you mentioned him because as I was going through the 2015 draft and I saw a guy that I took and then just a couple picks. Actually, I think you were the pick right after me. You took Cain. And I said, damn, I wish I would have taken Cain instead of the guy that I took. I can't remember who it was, but... okay, well, my next point, going back to what I said earlier, and that's about balance. And balance is great. I love to have a balanced fantasy team where you've got a little bit of this stat, a little bit of that stat, you got strengths everywhere. But sometimes you can overdo it, and I think I overdid it on a few picks during this draft. And I think case in point would be the Ian Desmond and Jacoby Ellsbury, who were guys that early in or the previous season, they were like 15 to 20 home run guys, maybe 20 stolen bases. Ellsbury in 2014 had 39 stolen bases and 16 home runs. And I was looking for that balance, trying to get a little bit of stolen bases, trying to get a little bit of home runs, thinking that's going to do it for me. But that doesn't really do it for you. Really what you need those specialty guys. I think you need those guys that hit 40 home runs because they'll come in and they can hit 6 home runs in a week for you. Like Donaldson did for me, and then you get that stolen base specialist guy. So sometimes balance is good, but balance could also hurt you like it did with me. Another guy that I tried to get that was like a balance type guy was Sin-Soo Choo, and he never panned out for me. He's one of those 15 home runs, 15, 20 stolen bases guys who was just garbage when you watch him week to week, day to day.
It's kind of interesting too when you have a week by week thing because you'll see a guy with like 15 home runs, 20 steals, but when it comes down to a week, he gets you like one or of each. And it doesn't really win you that stat.
Exactly. So don't be blinded by 15 home runs or 20 home runs thinking that's going to be the guy to give you your home runs.
Definitely. All right. Now, one reason I constantly say wait on pitching is because I think I'm good at picking that breakout pitcher, and I did it this year. I picked up Jacob deGrom pretty late in the draft. And what it was is he gave a nice sample size the year before. He had a low ERA, had a nice win percentage, had more strikeouts than he pitched the year before, but it wasn't a full season yet. And then I picked him up, and he had a full season. He was great. He had 14 wins. He had over 200 strikeouts. I think he had an ERA in the 240s. And I continued that trend because the next year I picked up Thor, Syndergaard. And last year I picked up Robbie Ray. And just seeing that little sample size, some dominance, more than 9 strikeouts per 9 innings in a young pitcher, I think is a good sign that he's going to break out the next year.
Well, the next point that I made here, I don't have a particular pick, but I was kind of making this point all along. That's don't rely too heavily on the past year's numbers. It's no guarantee that a guy who broke out last year and had a ton of home runs is going to turn around and have a ton of home runs this year. And that was, again, throughout my 2015 draft, I see tons of those mistakes that I made. I looked at what he did last year and I thought, this guy is going to do it again, and he didn't. I made that mistake a few years previously too with Kemp. I took Kemp in the first round after he almost went 40-40, and then he fell off the face of the earth. I still hate you, Kemp.
He's back on the Dodgers.
Oh man.
All right, so now what I kind of want to wrap up with is from this draft, I moved away from the stolen base strategy, and I took a look, and because I kind of thought I'll win stolen bases, I'll win runs scored. But actually, like usually the guy that leads the league in runs scored also hits a lot of home runs.
Yeah.
And I think those stolen base specialty guys, okay, maybe you have one on your team in a flex spot or something like that. But home run guys, when you runs, home runs, RBIs. And quite often we are an OPS league. And so even the low batting average guys with a lot of power still have nice OPS quite often.
Yeah.
And so I have really moved on to more of a power approach.
Yeah.
And the next year, in 2016, I kind of really overdid it. I had Stanton, I had Nelson Cruz, I had Anthony Rizzo. I had a lot of home runs on the team next year because of how I moved on from 2015. The lessons I learned of don't over-sacrifice for one stat. If a guy does that, let him win stolen bases that week and take all the other stats away from him. You know. But sometimes I would look for sneaky guys. For example, Rizzo got me 10 stolen bases last year. Hunter Pence was one that would get sneaky stolen bases. Having guys like Mookie Betts like that, guys that give you some power as well as some stolen bases, could make it so you win all stolen bases all the weeks outside of the time that you play the team that has D. Gordon.
Right.
And then the week you play the team that has D. Gordon or Billy Hamilton, you just let them win stolen bases. You know.
Yeah, and my takeaway from this draft was look ahead. You know, again with the prospects, they will pay off. Sometimes you gamble and they don't, but you don't gamble too much because you take them deep. One example was Bryant. He turned out to be a great pick, number 12. Another guy that I picked up, he wasn't in the draft. I picked him up off of waivers, but he was another one of those prospect guys. I waited until he was called up, and that was Carlos Correa. And I had him, from May or June when he got called up till the end of the season, and he hit 22 home runs and stole 16 bases. Very solid guy. So look at those prospects. Keep your eyes on the news. Those guys that get called up mid-season that are supposed to be, the next stud, that could be your next fantasy stud. So look ahead, look at prospects, take a chance once in a while.
And watch the dumb guys to win your fantasy league.
That's right. Stay dumb.
Dumb guys.